Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
In the Carolinas, some of the most beautiful sights and sounds belong to our classic beaches, rolling golf courses, certainly beautiful mountains, but here at the South Carolina Ports Authority, the scale and the scope and the excitement is awe-inspiring, but in a different way. Hello, I'm Chris William, and welcome to the longest running and most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. This time, it's all about transportation and infrastructure. In the Carolinas, we have the bookends in transportation. We have Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and then we have, in Charleston, the South Carolina Ports Authority. Between those two major connections to this globe, the Carolinas flourish. We will start our dialogue there in just a moment. Please stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. From the Port of Charleston, this edition of Carolina Business Review features a panel discussion on transportation and infrastructure with special guests Christy Hall, Jim Newsome, South Carolina Senator Larry Grooms, and G. Clifton Parker.
Welcome to our program. It looks different, doesn't it? Well, it should, because we are in berth number 1 of the Wando Terminal right here in Charleston, South Carolina, being hosted by the South Carolina Ports Authority, our good friend Jim Newsome, the state's good friend Jim Newsome. Jim, thank you for having us here. It's exciting. I don't know how else to say it.
Chris, thanks for being here.
Oh, gosh. And next to me, of course, you've heard also DOT Secretary Christy Hall, the Honorable Senator Larry Grooms, and way out there on the end is Clifton from GMP Trucking. And Clifton, I want to say something, because you are, I would say, the non-political one in this gang, so welcome, and try to jump in here as much as you can.
Thank you, sir.
It's going to be interesting. Jim, let me start with you, and as we're talking, we actually have a ship coming in the back. So when you're saying your comments here, give us a sense of not so much about the Ports Authority, but in general, container traffic, import and export, as South Carolina really gets its hands around the momentum that commerce has done, around what you have done and your team. Where is the port now? Where are import and exports, and how important it is for the next 10 years?
Well, we handled a record container volume in our last fiscal year, slightly over 1.2 million pure containers. And we've been the fastest growing port in percentage terms in the last 5 years. So we grew at 45%, from 2011 to 2016. We're reasonably balanced import and export wise. I think our growth in the next 5 years will be more in the export side because of the manufacturing growth in this state. This is a very focused manufacturing state. And the port's central to recruiting business. So we're on a good track. We need to keep that track going for the next 10 years because we got to invest a lot of money. That's the signature of the port industry, is big infrastructure and big investment. So Christy,
as DOT Secretary and somebody that's got, gosh, you got all things transportation running through your veins, and you have for a long time now. You hear Jim talk about the port, you get a sense of where we are, not just here in Charleston, actually on the port in the Wando Terminal. But when you hear him talk about what this port means, and you think about what your role and your team do for the state and for the Southeast, how would you characterize some of the growth that we've had, and where are we going in the next 10 years?
Well, obviously South Carolina's in a very good place when it comes to economic development and the movement of people and goods all across the state. We've got a phenomenal port under the leadership of Jim Newsome here. And thanks to the General Assembly, we finally have sustainable resources to make the necessary road improvements to address the freight bottlenecks that we've encountered in our state for the last decade plus. So we're well positioned to be able to make a significant difference in our state over the next decade and more.
You talk about bottlenecks. You're talking about things like malfunction junction, those
Yes.
kind of bottlenecks, or is there something broader in addition to that? Is there something broader around the transport of not just containers, but the imports in general into South Carolina?
Well, specifically the freight bottlenecks when it comes to truck movements across our interstates is what I'm referring to there. But we also recognize the intermodal vision for South Carolina, which includes the rail component as well to surface transportation. So infrastructure is absolutely key to the economy and helping support the operations here at this port. Other inland ports that Mr. Newsome's developing across the state as well.
Senator Grooms, you know a little something about transportation, right? You've been on transportation for the Senate for a while, chairing that. When you've heard these comments so far, and you think about it from a clinical, from the policy, from how these regs, how these laws are put in place, how the funding happens. Where do you see the biggest challenge to make sure that these bottlenecks really are cleared out, and how do you do it in a fiscally responsible way?
Well, for one, there has to be an understanding of just how important our port is to our state's economy, and has to be an understanding of just how important our rivers inland, our surface transportation is to ensuring that these boxes get to where they need to be. And so when the members of the General Assembly, when I'm able to explain why it's in their interest to vote for additional funding for freight corridors, when it's in their constituents' best interest to vote for additional funding for harbor deepening, when it's in their constituents' best interest to have full support of our port and our road network, then we're able to garner the necessary votes that we need to ensure that our infrastructure needs to be where it ought to be. And it hasn't always been that case. I mean, our port was doing gangbusters for a while, and then it went into one of the largest declines of any East Coast port. There was a sense that our port wasn't important. And so we passed a restructuring bill. We changed the operating model a little bit within our port, and then we began to make the case as to why someone in Greenville, why someone in Dillon, why someone in Anderson, why those legislators who aren't anywhere near the coast, why they should offer their support. See, there's this unwritten ledger when we start doling out the state resources, and explaining to them that the port is a state resource. It's not just a Charleston issue, it's a statewide resource.
Do you still feel like, I don't want to go down this road too far yet because we're going to spend some time on this, but do you feel like you still have to work that hard to convince people that this is a, and I'd say, Senator, in all respect, it's much more than a state resource. This is a regional resource, Southeast U.S. resource. So is that really a hard sell now?
It has to be a continuing sell. It has to be a continuation of this is why it's important. 1 in 11 jobs in South Carolina are tied directly or indirectly to the operations here at our port. And so when a new member is elected, let's say from Greenville, we have to explain to them why our port is important. And we have to ensure that there is sufficient support for our port because our economy depends on it. Yeah. If we want to have incomes that would increase the standard of living and the quality of life for the people of South Carolina, for the people of the region, then we have to have a vibrant and active port, but we also have to have the connections inlet on our surface transportation. We passed a DOT restructuring bill nearly a decade ago, but the General Assembly continued to starve our DOT of the necessary resources. Secretary Hall's predecessor, in a statement that astounded me one day before testimony before the Transportation Committee.
Peter St. Ange?
Yeah, General St. Ange, made the statement that his #1 job is to manage the decline of our state's greatest asset, our road network. Yeah. And that was a shame. And so we had to make the case that it was more than just management, because there were some who were saying all we had to do was restructure again and again and again, and the roads magically get built. That they don't. So we passed a roads bill this year that will provide Christy and the DOT with the necessary resources to bring our road network up to a condition of good, but also to have some money so that we can now start expanding the network to ensure that our freight corridors are open and these boxes get to the destinations that they need to be.
You know, yeah, Clifton, I would say he teed it up for you. How can you not talk about this?
What I wanted to say, being a user for over 30 years,
User of the roads.
Of the roads and the port, is that leadership makes all the difference. And one of the things that, you know, under Jim and Christy and the senator, you know, we've taken a more holistic approach and got out of the silos. I mean, Jim, because it's been all his life, you know, realized you can't do what you want to do without trucks, you can't do without rails. And really he facilitated conversations between rail and truck that, you know, we still joke about, you know, how we've never got along, but because Jim painted a vision of how we could be dominant in the Southeast by using a short line rail to the upstate, and now we have one going into Dillon. And likewise, which I'm a highway commissioner and I've been there 6 years, and I was under some of that other leadership, but what you got when you got Christy was someone who knows DOT from the bottom up, and you just can't substitute that kind of leadership. So when she speaks to the senator and his colleagues, she speaks from being there, you know, 30 years and her experience. So it's just been amazing from my perspective as a user to see all the people working together and bringing all the players to the table and say, how do we do this better? And I think what you're seeing is three of the best in the South.
You know, this is
it's
a real partnership, Chris, if you think about it. I mean, this is a big business. It's a $250 million business. We earn money from the shipping lines. That's how we get our revenue. But the state is an important investment partner for infrastructure. So the state's investing about $800 million, or hasn't put aside, or will put aside about $800 million in port-related infrastructure. Christie's building a $300 million access road to our new terminal. The state put aside $300 million for our harbor deepening. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that support. So it's a big investment thesis, but everyone's on the same page today. If it wasn't for truckers, I mean, we can do all we want investing here. If we don't have truckers that are able to do 7,000 transactions here a day, we can't run the port.
So clearly the port's time has come again. You've got a lot of momentum. You all seemingly agree on a whole bunch of things here, but I want to come back to something Senator Grooms and Secretary Hall. It's easy now, and I say this with all due respect because I know it always hasn't been, but it's easy now to make a case that the ports and the transportation and the backbones, Christy, of the state of South Carolina is in a much better place and will be in a much better place. But as you sell this vision, and as you say that this will support all kinds of communities, you know, there are still those out there that say, yeah, that's all good and we want Jim Newsome and the ports to succeed, but we can't take our eye off the ball of education and helping those that are disenfranchised and ended up, you know, being the least among us. So how do we make sure that we don't lose, myopathy around, gosh, let's just lean into this and commerce is going to take care of everything. How do you talk about that?
Well, you talk about making South Carolina a better place. And how do you do that? It does require vision. It does require leadership. You can manage something and just check off the boxes from time to time, but it's where you want to be. Where do we want our state to be in 25, 50 years? And how do we get there?
Yeah.
And you get there by creating opportunity, economic opportunities. You do it by creating jobs. The best social program is a good job. So when the economy is strong, then you have the necessary funds that you can then make those investments in K-12 education, in third grade reading programs. You can then put the money into our technical schools, which are some of the best in the world at training new workers and retraining folks who've gone from one different type of job from a textile industry into now manufacturing BMWs and Volvos. You raise all boats when your economy rises. And the key driver of the South Carolina economy is right here at our port. But we have to make sure that our legislators and our governor, that the politicians never forget where the bread is buttered.
Yeah, all right. Christy, same thing. When you talk about education with your colleagues, Secretary of Education Molly and others, how do you, gosh, you've got all this great money, gas tax is coming now, and you know clearly the wind is at your back. But how do you remain sensitive, and I know you are, I'm not assuming it, but how do you remain sensitive and remain supportive for those other areas of the state that may touch on transportation and infrastructure but aren't the same?
Well, I mean, I would argue that it's all interconnected. And I'm from a very small, non-urban county in the state and very sensitive to the economy in those local areas as well. Agribusiness is a big business in South Carolina still, and so and those tend to be outside of the urban areas, and we have to serve that sector as well to make sure that the movement of those goods to market are able to be accomplished in a meaningful way without significant delays and interruption. Workforce development, which ties directly to the education component, is a critical issue in South Carolina, just like the rest of the region. You know, I go all around the state and I see different areas looking for workers, now hiring. A lot of innovations are trying to be put into place currently to try to generate that workforce for not only our sector, our contractors, truck drivers. I mean, it's just really an all-in approach to try to get that workforce developed for our success.
You know, Clifton, yeah, go ahead.
We know from a recent survey that the University of South Carolina did that port-related jobs pay on average about 40% more in average wage than non-port related jobs. So it's good to grow those jobs. And in our port, about 80 to 90% of the jobs don't require a 4-year college degree. They work with a technical background. We have a great technical college system. We've engaged them. So it's a real opportunity to have a good paying job without a 4-year college degree, a lot of college debt, and something meaningful to the economy of the state.
What about that interaction, Clifton, where we're on this workforce development and education? Not just GNP, but how do you take a leadership role in straddling that place between transportation issues that we've been talking about and also being a leader in education?
Well, again, I believe our state's really ahead of the curve. I mean, we've got a South Carolina Council of Competitiveness, which truckers are on the board, and we've really, again, what does it take? And we all know it takes workers to do all the things that we're doing, and so there's a lot of initiatives from the State House that's saying, okay, technical schools, what kind of campaign can we put out there that makes some of these jobs attractive? So
right.
I think we're really out in front of things. We've got grants that are helping for take people who may have been displaced and retraining, and say in our field, technicians are just as important as truck drivers, and that's another place that we have to really make sure that we find a source of people. So the jobs are really good jobs, like Jim said, but I think the generation that's out there today has been, I'm a parent of a 35-year-old who, you got to go to college, you got to go to 4-year degree, and today in trucking, we don't have near the openings in the white collar job that in most cases in our world, a truck driver's 15 to 25% higher paid than a white collar job with a 4-year degree, and it seems like it just hasn't been sexy enough.
Well, is that it? Is it because the job's not sexy, or are there not enough guidance? And I don't want to put it on guidance counselors at school, but are there not enough people talking about what is available?
I would say that, but I would tell you in South Carolina, back to that South Carolina Council on Competitiveness, we're out in front of it. We were talking just Wednesday about guidance counselors, and making sure that, when you go into a guidance counselor's office, you see, Wofford, Clemson, College of Charleston posters, but you don't see, GNP Trucking, or you don't necessarily see the South Carolina Ports Authority. So there's things we've got to do at the high school level that collaboratively we are doing, and we're seeing results. So,
go ahead. And you got to get them in middle school, actually, because by the time they're in high school, they know everything. So we're reaching out to the middle schools.
You're being facetious.
No,
right?
I'm very serious. You've got to get them in the middle school. You've got to get them engaged. But I think the biggest debt in our society today is college debt. It's bigger than mortgage debt. Yeah. And we've got to change the paradigm that everyone has to go to 4-year college. And we can do that here in this state because we're a state very focused on manufacturing and distribution and jobs that feed that sort of concept.
So, Senator, so what is the inside baseball dialogue that goes on within the State House around how education kind of not just dovetails into transportation, but in general, I know you've heard this ad nauseum about the lack of really skilled workers. Is there a political answer to that question?
You do the best you can with what you have. And you stress the fundamentals. You stress what creates wealth. A manufacturing base. You're creating wealth. When you're creating wealth, the people of the state, the people of the region will do much better. And then you make those investments in public education. You hear the concerns that industry has, that we're having a shortage in a particular area, and then you make adjustments within your K-12 system. You make adjustments within your technical schools by promoting the jobs that we need. We were facing a nursing shortage in our state. We knew it was coming. So we started making the investments and giving incentives to some of our colleges and universities for nursing programs. So now we're coming out of that slump, and now we're seeing on the horizon that we may not have the qualified truck drivers that we need. And so the Council of Competitiveness, that they share with the General Assembly their ideas, and then it's up to us to be able to make the sell when we're doling out the state dollars in the annual appropriations bill.
Yeah. Christy, let's switch gears here. We got about 5 minutes left, at least in the first half of this discussion. Rural-urban divide comes up a lot. You know, there's a clear difference between a rural setting and an urban setting, and I don't know that that is a problem, but that is an issue that comes up when it comes to economic development, when it comes up to lifestyles. You know, we'll always have farmlands, we'll always have city centers, but how as a DOT leader, how does the urban-rural divide play into your funding formula, the way you prioritize projects, and the way that you look at building communities with the broad grand transportation plan that you have?
Right, so there are some things that we look at strategically at the state level, like freight corridors, and those go through both urban and rural areas. So we're really a little bit blind to that when it comes to those statewide priorities. But where it can play a role is once we start looking at certain priorities at a county level, then obviously we have to look at the differences between urban and rural and make sure it's balanced as best as we can. Because those citizens, regardless of where they live, they expect road work and, you know, projects coming out from tax money that they're applying towards the system. So it's really, again, we look at it strategically at the statewide level, and then once we get to the county level, we try to balance it out.
Clifton, you know, this urban-rural divide thing, does that, in case you're wondering, by the way, that sound is
Container crane.
You want to describe that? Just take about 30 seconds.
So that's a 2,000-ton container crane moving down the wharf to work a ship that just docked here, the Maersk Clifton. And that crane can handle about 35 or 40 crane lifts an hour, basically, which is world class.
And it's getting ready to offload this
getting ready to start working the ship. So it's moving into position. The ship just docked. The labor's here, so we're getting ready to go.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jim, for that. A little captioning there. So Clifton, you heard the rural-urban divide question. When you look at it as a businessman, as a leader in the corporate community here in South Carolina, and the same issue, how do you find balance that gives respect to the urban and rural settings, but also gives equal opportunity and equal access for everyone?
Well, you know, what I would tell you, our infrastructure is my office every day. I mean, we're making investments to move vehicles up and down the highway. So, you know, from the business perspective, you know, we need good, clear interstates. We need good port access because, you know, as being what sometimes you consider well-regulated, over-regulated industry, where, you know, our drivers are on a clock, and any delay is really an unplanned expense.
Right.
So, you know, we believe that the priorities have to be the main arteries that move freight and people, but at the same token, you know, we have a huge issue with fatalities on our highways, and so you can't, you know, forget some of the other issues that are out in those communities. So I think with the funding that South Carolina's gotten, I mean, I think we are addressing some of the things that you're talking about, and I think our Commerce Department is addressing some of those things with trying to have brownfield projects ready and then working on greenfield projects as well to help those economically depressed communities. So, you know, I think you got to start somewhere, and I think we're starting in the right place. The
inland port in Dillon, South Carolina is a classic example. Dillon County is one of the lowest per capita income counties in the state. Yeah. Harbor Freight Tools is expanding there. CSX serves it by rail. So we think that inland port will have a major economic impact on one of the lesser developed counties in our state. So that's how it all ties together. If we put infrastructure in place, we believe that distribution will come to that location because there are good fundamentals there.
And and we've got about 30 seconds left, Jim. What are your hopes for that port, inland port, in literally 30 seconds?
Well, I mean, Greer exceeded our expectations. It's done 120,000 rail lifts. I think Dillon can be as successful in a different way. It won't be quite as big, but I think it will attract a lot of distribution-focused business to that region.
Okay,
and that
all right.
provides good jobs because it's on the main line of the CSX.
Thank you. Next week, part 2. We hope you'll stay with us. From the South Carolina port, I'm Chris William. See you next week.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Bearings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.